All right, I will say good morning, a beautiful daf ahead of us today. I want to thank our sponsors for our learning, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Sammy Amalka Estherson, in the memory of their parents, Yitzchak Leib ben Aaron HaKohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, and Hinda Bas Henech Ephraim. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah and the family in a chama. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Danny and Gail Cutler, in honor of and as a chus for Seth and Rachel Rotenberg, and in great appreciation for the shir. We thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, Samuel Slamowitz, as well as in the chus for Refuah Shalema for Ruchama Aviva Bas Shena Chana, and for Rachel Yehudis Bas Tova Gittel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, Kol Cholei Yisrael will have a complete and enduring refuah. And I will say with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Tes Zayin. We have the great schos to continue in the sugya of Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim. So we are picking up today's daf Tes Zayin 16, and we are picking up Emeretz Hashem, Lema Misayele, and Tes Vava Madays 15b, Lema Misayele, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, about 17 lines up from the bottom, right after the period. So we'll say, so remember again, we left off with something very important. So remember, to trace the progression of the Mishnah once again, we have Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim espousing his idea. We're not going to go through everything again right now. Rabbi Akiva espousing his idea. Then we have Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir says, L'divreihem, based on what we've learned, we now see that what? That on Erev Pesach, you could burn chametz, that is, or I should say, we'll just call it truma tahora with truma tameya. Right? Chametz, that is truma tahora, with chametz, that is truma tameya. Rabbi Yossi comes along and says, Eina min amida. The comparison is incorrect. And then ultimately, again, the Mishnah then goes on from there. So we spent, our share yesterday was devoted to trying to figure out the sheet of Rabbi Meir. When Rabbi Meir says, L'divreihem, according to their words, what is he referring to? Or more specifically, who is he referring to? Is he learning it out from Rabbi Chanina or Rabbi Akiva? We posited yesterday he's learning it out from Rabbi Yoshua. But I will say what we ended off with yesterday was a very important qualification. And the qualification was a statement of Rabbi Asi. And Rabbi Asi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that the machlokis between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi is only b'sheish, is only in the 6th hour of the day. That's where Rabbi Meir says, yes, you could burn chametz, truma tahora, with chametz, truma tameya. Right? And that's where Rabbi Yossi says, no, you can't. No, you can't, because the cases in the Mishnah are dealing with burning tummy items together. You can't burn a tahar item together with a tummy item. However, Rabbi Yossi said everyone agrees that once the 7th hour comes, that you could certainly burn truma tamei or truma tahora. Why? We'll say, what happens in the 7th hour? What happens in the 7th hour? Isser da'oraisa. Isser da'oraisa. And once you have an Isser da'oraisa, as Rashi pointed out, everybody will agree, an Isser, once chametz is Asr min da'oraisa, it's like it's tamei. It's like it's tamei. And therefore, even Rabbi Yossi would agree that halacha l'maisa, you could burn chametz tahora with chametz tameya. Good. So we'll say, now we're picking up with that. So we'll say, let's bring a proof to this idea. Rashi actually points out, de b'sheva mod Rabbi Yossi. That even Rabbi Yossi, who disagrees with Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah, would agree that once you reach hour number 7, you are absolutely permitted to burn truma tahora with truma tameya. The Gemara says, where do we get this from? It's from quoting from yesterday's daf as well. So remember again, pigol, a carbon that was offered with the wrong intention. So for example, the Kohen had in mind to eat it after the permitted zman. No, sir, carbon that is actively left over past its permissible window. And tamei, which means a carbon that has actually become tamei. What's the halacha? Beis Shammai omrim ein nisrafin ka'achas. Beis Shammai says that halacha l'maisa, you are not permitted to burn these items together. Beis Hillel says no, nisrafin ka'achas. Beis Hillel says ultimately, you are permitted to go ahead and burn them together. So we'll say, what do you see from here? Look at Rashi for just a moment. Sir. Rabbi Yossi Amar La Le'el v'Kamar Rabbi Meir Baha Hudam Beis Hillel Nisrafin Ka'achas Mishum De Pigol V'Nosar Sira Midaraisa. So we'll say this would be a good example. See here, remember, Pigol and Nosar, we'll say at the end of the day, only have Tuma Dirabanan. But halacha l'maisa, they're aser mid'oraisa. So because they're asr mid'oraisa, that isr da'oraisa makes it equivalent as if they're what? As if they are tameh. And therefore, Beis Hillel will say you could burn them all together. So this is a proof. So Rabbi Yossi will say, once something is asr mid'oraisa, this is very interesting, and isr da'oraisa takes on almost a tuma, a quasi-like tuma prohibition to it. And that's why you could burn it all together. To which the Gemara says, no, that's not a good raya. Shiny hasam, this like tuma d'Rabbanan. We'll say at the end of the day, pigol and nosar do have a tuma d'Rabbanan. This nan, ha-pigol v'hanosar and tamanes hayadayim. Therefore, we'll say that's not necessarily a good raya because pigol and nosar themselves do have an element of tuma associated with them. Okay, fine. So then we say, let's bring another proof. So also we're just trying to prove Rabbi Yochanan's assertion that Rabbi Yossi would agree with Rabbi Meir once we get to the 7th hour of Erev Pesach. Once chametz becomes asr mid'oraisa, everyone will agree that you could burn chametz truma tahora with chametz truma tzemeya because the isr da'oraisa essentially is the equivalent of tuma. So let me say, let's bring another proof to this. Hapashib, an interesting case. If you have bread that became moldy, v'nifsala me'le'echol adam, and ultimately again it's no longer fit for human consumption. However, v'hakelev yachol la'achla, we all say, but a dog could eat it. A dog could eat it, so it's not what's called nifsal me'achilas kelev. A dog could eat it. Mitami tumas ochlin. So first of all, again, I will say, because it could still be consumed by a dog, therefore, again, it retains the ability to become tameh as a food. Mitami tumas ochlin kibetza. So we'll say, so again, it could generate tumas ochlin in the size of an egg. V'nisrefes imhat tmeya bepesach. And ultimately, again, I will say, if this was truma, let's say again, halacha l'maisa, again, this moldy bread was truma bread, right? And so you could burn it Erev Pesach together with what? Together, ultimately, again, with truma tmeya. So we'll say, so this seems, look at Rashi for just a moment. The second white line in Rashi, v'nesemes ivatev Pesach, v'afilu hi truma tahora, v'havad Rabbi Yossi ka'amarla, di'i Rabbi Meir afilu pas ma'al yasa shari, Ushma minad midemod Rabbi Yossi hecha delav basachile. So we'll say, listen to this. What does it say? You could burn this moldy piece of bread if it was truma. You could burn it with truma tmeya. So we'll say, so now listen to this. What is this a case of? This is a case of truma tahora. This would be a case of truma tahora. That's what? That's inedible because it's moldy. And yet, what is the Gemara saying? That you could burn it together with truma tmeya. What do you see from here? That halacha l'maisa you could burn inedible truma tahora with truma tmeya. Now I will say, now when else do you have a case of inedible truma tahora with truma tmeya? After the 7th hour, right? Shasisr. So this is another proof that essentially once chametz becomes inedible, then ultimately again it kind of has the status of tuma. To which the Gemara says this is not a good raya. Shiny hasam the afra ba'almahu. But say you can't bring a raya for moldy bread because moldy bread that essentially is nifsal me'achilas adam can't be consumed by people, has the status of afar, has the status of dirt. So therefore, we'll say this is not a good raya. Fine. Ihachi, my moda. So we'll say at the end of the day, then what is the lashon ultimately again of moda? We'll say look at Rashi. Ihachi, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Chanina Yalif. So we'll say now we're jumping back for just a moment, right? So remember, let's go. If you don't have to look back, I'll read it to you. But remember again, we're going back now to the Mishnah. So we'll say, by the way, let's assume right now. So here's what we have. Where we're up to right now in the conversation between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir is, remember, Rabbi Meir says, Midivrayim, from their words, we learned that you could burn chametz truma tahora, chametz truma tmeya on Erev Pesach. It's still machlokes where exactly Rabbi Meir is learning this out from. Is it Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Akiva? Is it Rabbi Yoshua? Fine. Either way, comes along Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says it's not a good comparison. What the Gemara just has effectively done, and now we're going to kind of close this out for just a moment, is their argument is only prior to hour number 7. But once you get to hour number 7, is it Isser Daraisa? Even Rabbi Yossi would agree that halacha l'maisa, you could burn truma tahora with truma tmeya because the Isser Daraisa essentially creates almost like an Isser Tuma. Fine. So I'll say, so now, the Gemara is jumping back. Ihachi, if it is true that Rabbi Meir learns out his shita from Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim, right? Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim teaches us that you could burn items together, even though you are exposing an item of lesser tumah to an item of greater tumah. And Rabbi Meir is therefore learning from that you could burn chametz truma tahora with chametz truma tameah. So my modeh. So both say. So why does the Mishnah then go on to say what? The Mishnah then goes on to say umodim Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua shesarf and zuli esma of zuli esma. That both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua agree that you could burn chametz tahora by itself and chametz tameah by itself. Why are you even bringing in Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua to this conversation? I was supposed to say, if you understand that ultimately Rabbi Meir is learning out his shita from Rabbi Chanina, then what do Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua have to do with this conversation at all? To which the Gemara says, Yahachi my moda, hachi kamen Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Meir. Well, see, here we go. This is what Rabbi Yossi was saying to Rabbi Meir. I feel Rabbi Yoshua, the Mekel, even Rabbi Yoshua was Mekel beforehand, ki Mekel beteluya utemeya. The Bible say, when was Rabbi Yoshua Mekel? Rabbi Yoshua was only Mekel ultimately again in a case of Tuluya and Tameya, in a case of doubtful chametz. So we'll say, if you remember again, look at Rashi. Rashi says, "Va'afil Rabbi Yoshua nami desham inalei demekel tvei gabi chavis deka'amar yitam ena biyad mode b'shefer deis Rabbi." Remember, this is the second case of Rabbi Yoshua. Also remember, we were focusing yesterday on the case of the broken barrel of truma that was dripping into the chulin tameyin. But there was another case of Rabbi Yoshua. Remember, what was the case? The case is where you have a barrel of truma wine, and it's a suffix if it's tummy or not. Right? Remember again, somebody tummy walked in, you're not sure that they touched it or not. So remember again, what did Rabbi Yoshua say? Rabbi Yoshua said, essentially, you no longer have to guard it. If it was closed, you could leave it open. If it was in a more private spot, you could put it in a public spot. So we'll say, when is Rabbi Yoshua Mekel? So comes on Rabbi Yossi, and he says to Rabbi Meir, when is Rabbi Yoshua Mekel? Ki Mekel, betluya Tameya. Ultimately, Rabbi Yoshua is only Mekel in a case of doubtful Tumah and Vadei Tumah. Aval betahora u'tameya lo. But I will say, ultimately, again, in a case of tahora and tameya, Rabbi Yoshua would not be Mekel. Ihachi, amai eina minami, amai eina hi minamida. If that's the case, ultimately, again, then why does Rabbi Yossi say to Rabbi Meir, the cases are not comparable? The Gemara says, mida umidahi. They are, in fact, totally comparable. Take a look at Rashi, Rabosai. Look at Rashi. Ihachi, it's in the wide lines, probably about 8 lines in. Ihachi. So also we're jumping back now. If it's really true that Rabbi Meir learns his shita from Rabbi Chanina, Amai eina hi amida v'amida. Rashi says, Daha, b'sheish iki sur d'rabanan ala tahora kiyasam, di'ika Tuma d'Rabbanan. So we'll say ultimately again, then the cases are absolutely comparable, because then Rabbi Chanina is dealing with the case of Tuma d'Oraisa or Tuma d'Rabbanan, and the case of Truma Torah or Truma d'Rabbanan will also be. The case of Truma Torah with Truma Tameya in the 6th hour is also a case d'Rabbanan. So they are in fact talking about the same exact cases. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yirmiyah babasa shenitma b'mashkin shenitmu machmas sharetz. Okay, boss, we're going to make it a little more complicated. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says, no. What's the case here? The case of Rabbi Chanina Rabbosa is an interesting case. Now what we're doing is, it's amazing how this works. Every time we think that we are moving forward, we end up going all the way back now to the beginning of the Mishnah. So now once again, we are reinventing the case of Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim. What's his case? What's Rabbi Chanina's case? His case is a piece of sacrificial meat which became tamei, b'mashkin with liquid, shenitmu machmas sheretz. So what's Rabbi Chanina's case of the tamei sacrificial meat is where you have liquid that came in contact with the sheretz. Remember again, a sheretz is an av. Good. The liquid that comes in contact with the sheretz is a rishon, and now the liquid came in contact ultimately again with the piece of sacrificial meat. So it says the Gemara, Rabbi Meir the Tamei, Rabbi Yossi the Tamei. Rabbi Meir, so we'll say now, and here's the machlokes. We'll say, here we go. Now it turns out that the case of Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim will say is the case of a piece of sacrificial meat which comes in contact with liquid, which came in contact with the sheretz. And I both say this is the machlokes actually between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. Here we go. The Gemara says as follows: Rabbi Meir Tamei Damar Tumas Mashkin Tamei Achem D'Rabbanan. But Rabbi Meir holds that the ability for liquids to convey or to transmit tuma to something else is only midrabanan. So we'll say, we'll see, d'oraisa liquids themselves can become tamei, but the ability for a liquid to transmit tuma is only midrabanan. Rabbi Yossi the Tamei Damar Tumas Mashkin the Tamei Achirim Da'oraisa. Whereas Rabbi Yossi holds that the ability for liquids to convey or to transmit Tumah is Da'oraisa. Here we go, we'll say Desanya. We see in the verse, the top of Tazayin. Sufik Mashkin Litamei Tamei. L'tamei achirim tar Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir says, if you have a case of suffix, meaning I'm not sure if liquids became tamei or not, so we'll say suffix tuma, to declare an actual liquid tamei is tamei, which we'll say is another way of saying what? Suffix da'araisa l'chumra, so da'araisa l'chumra. So we'll say, meaning if I'm not sure if a particular liquid was exposed to tuma or not, we will be machmir, we will assume that the liquid is tamei, because we will say the ability for a liquid to become tamei is da'araisa. However, l'tamei achirim, if I have a suffix, I have a doubt about whether or not the liquid conveyed tumah to something else, then ultimately, again, the liquid is tar. Div Rabbi Meir. Both say these words Rabbi Meir. So we'll say, in Rabbi Meir's view, the ability of a liquid to become tamei is da'araisa, but the ability of a liquid to convey tumah is only midrabanan. V'chin haya Rabbi Elazar Omer Kidvarav. And Rabbi Elazar said the same thing as Rabbi Meir. Okay, so we'll say, so we have now, we're going to challenge that statement in a little bit, but we have Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Meir in the camp that's saying liquid could acquire tumah midoraisa, but it could only convey tumah midrabanan. Rabbi Huda says la kol tamei. Rabbi Huda disagrees. Rabbi Huda says no. Liquid has the ability both to go ahead and acquire and transmit tumah midoraisa. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon say lo ochlin tmein lekelin tahorin. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon say that ultimately, again, for ochlin purposes, the ability for liquids to convey tumah to ochlin, to food, is deoraisa, but ultimately, again, for kalim, they don't have the ability to do so. Suppose let's analyze this. Suppose say the Gemara now is going to suggest that this halacha lemaisa is the conversation or the machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah. Namely, again, so remember the case Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim will be a piece of meat which acquired tumah through contact with a liquid that itself was exposed to a sheretz. And the machlokes Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah is the ability of liquids to convey tumah to another item. V'savar Rabbi Elazar mashkin islahu tumah. Roland. So what does Rabbi Elazar? Now remember, just above we said that according to Rabbi Elazar, he holds like Rabbi Meir, namely that liquids could acquire tumah midorai, so they cannot transmit tumah. Does Rabbi Elazar hold that liquids acquire tumah altogether? V'atanya, we learned Rabbi Elazar Omer ein tumah lamashkin kol ikar. This is pretty incredible. Rabbi Elazar holds that liquids in general do not acquire tumah. Rabbi say that means biblically, midoraisa, liquids cannot acquire tumah. Teda. So how do we know? The Shaharei hated Yosef ben Yoezer ish Tzreida, because Yosef ben Yoezer from Tzreida, he gave the following testimony. Number one, al ayil kamsa dachan. I'll say al kamsa, Rashi points out, was a type of grasshopper. He testified about a specific species of grasshopper that it was kosher. Number one, dachan literally means tar, but it was kosher. V'amashkin beis mitbach. Rabbi say this is fascinating. And the liquids of beis mitbach, Rabbi say means the butchering chamber. That refers to the area inside of the Beis Hamikdash where they would go out and slaughter. But remember again, in the Beis Hamikdash itself, remember again, if you're walking into the Beis Hamikdash, you walk into the Azara, right? Then you go ahead and you walk up a set of steps. There's a platform. Walk down a set of steps, and then you're in the inner courtyard. Inside of that inner courtyard, you see the mizbeach hachitzon, the outer mizbeach. Remember again, if you walk around that mizbeach, you walk into the ulam, into the kodesh, and then you hit the curtain of the kodesh hakadoshim. Right in front of the mizbeach were a series of rings. Right? Those were the rings that ultimately, again, you would push the animal down on its side, the rings would come up, you'd lock it down around the head of the animal, and you do shechita like that. But after they did shechita, the sacrificial animals were, essentially cut open, dismembered, the sacrificial parts. That was done in what's called the Beis Mitbachya. There was a chamber. There was a chamber that was there. So listen to this. So Yossi ben Yoezer said that Mashkin Beis Mitbachya dachan, that any of the liquids inside of the Beis Mitbachya, suppose say what liquids are there in the Beis Mitbachya? The pashtus, there's blood and there's water. These liquids are tahar, which will say sounds like not only do they not convey tumah, but what? They also don't acquire tumah. So the Gemara says, Hanicha l'Shmuel amar dachin milatame tumas achirim. Shabbos say this works well according to Shmuel, who says that what? That Allah means they don't have the ability to convey tumah. They have the ability to acquire tumah, but not the ability to convey tumah. Aval tumas asman yeshlan shapir. Elol rav damar dachin mamish According to Rav, who says no, it literally means that they don't have the ability to acquire or to transmit tumah. So what is there to say? Both say what that will mean ultimately again is that halacha l'maisa, when we said before that Rabbi Elazar holds like Rabbi Meir, it means that halacha l'maisa holds like Rabbi Meir ultimately again in one case, namely that the liquid does have the ability to acquire tumah midaraisa, but it doesn't have the ability to transmit it. To which the Gemara says, "I v'haki dvarav ka'amar." I, but halacha l'maisa it says he holds like his words plural. The Gemara says dinafishi va'od v'ha'chein katani. Ultimately, it says also again Rose. So first of all, it says kidvarav, which sounds like he holds like him in all cases. Furthermore, it says vaha v'chein katani, and so too it says. To which the Gemara says kasha. All right, so we'll say so. There's a little bit of a question that's left when we go ahead and align the shita of Rabbi Elazar like the shita of Rabbi Meir. Fine, the Gemara leaves that alone. Then I will say what we're going to do now is pause for a moment in this and focus on liquid. So we're kind of leaving the Mishnah on the side for just a moment. So we just kind of reopened the entire Mishnah now, and whereas we thought we were settled about the Shita of Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim, now we just went back and said, well, maybe the case of Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim is a case of a piece of sacrificial meat which became tamei through contact with a liquid which itself came in contact with a sheretz. So we'll say, and then the machlokas Rameir Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah is the ability of liquid to convey tumah, or tamei liquid to convey tumah to other items. Well, okay, now that we started that, we're going to go down this path of tumah and liquids. So here we go. So Gufa, Rav Amar Dachan Mamish. Remember again, let's go back. So the Gemara just opened up this discussion regarding the liquids of the slaughter chamber. Right? So you have the slaughter chamber or the butchering chamber. That's the better. The butchering chamber inside of the Beis Hamikdash. So remember, you know, say the Mishnah. So the Brisa said that Yossi ben Yoezer said that the mashkin beis mitbachia are dachan, that the liquids of the butchering chamber are tahar. So we're trying to figure out what that means. So Rav Amar dachan mamish. Rav says tahar from everything, meaning they can't go ahead and acquire tumah, and they certainly can't convey tumah. Ushmuel Amar Shmuel says no, dachan milatami tumas acherim aval tumas atzmi yeshan. And Shmuel says no. What it means is they themselves can become tamei, but they cannot transmit tumah. So we'll say a fundamental machlokes. To which the Gemara says, Rav Amar Dachan Mamish Kasavar Tumas Mashkin Dirabanon. So Rav says that what does it mean that the liquids of the butchering chamber are Mamish Tahar? So Rav will say like this. In reality, halacha l'maisa, there's no such thing as tumah legabe liquids. Right? Liquids don't become tamei. The only tumah that exists legabe liquids is dirabanon. Right? There's rabbinic tumah that was imposed upon mashkin. However, v'chi gazer rabbanon b'mashkin da'alma, or mashkin beis mitbach yelo gazer. And when the rabbis instituted their dirabanon, their tumah dirabanon, they only instituted it legabe general liquids, but they did not institute it regarding the liquids of the Beis Hamikdash, which of course makes sense. In general, we see this concept that rabbinic law is often not applied in different areas of the Beis Hamikdash. We saw this again by Hilchos Shabbos. So therefore, Rav's manal both says this. Rav's manal is midoraisa. There is no such thing as tumas mashkin. There's no such thing as tumah of liquids. It's midrabanon, and the Rabbanon chose not to impose it on the liquids of the slaughter chamber in the Beis Hamikdash. Shmuel Amar Shmuel says, "Docher milatami tumas acherim." Shmuel says when we say that it's tar, we mean that liquids can't convey tumah to something else. Aval tumas atzman yesh lahem. But ultimately, again, liquids absolutely have their own tumah. Kasavar tumas mashkin atzman deoraisa. L'tami acherim. I'm sorry. Tumas maskin atzman doraisa. L'tami acherim dirabanon. V'chi gazer rabbanon b'mashkin da'al b'mashkin meis mitbach yolo gazer. So both say fundamental machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Rav holds that mid doraisa there's no such thing as tumas mashkin, no such thing as tumah of liquids. It's only dirabanon, and the rabbanon went ahead and were only gozer on situations outside of the Beis Hamikdash, but were never gozer on any liquids of the Beis Hamikdash. Shmuel says no. Tumas mashkin, meaning the ability of mashkin themselves to become tamei, is doraisa. The Rabbanon were gozer that what? That not only could mashkin become tamei, but what? They could convey tumah to something else. But the only time that Chazal legislated that was outside of the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore the liquids of the Beis Hamikdash itself can become tamei, but what? Cannot go ahead and convey tuma. So this is the machlokes. V'chilo gazra abana l'tamui achirim aval tumas ashman yislan. So Shmuel will say that halacha l'maisa Chazal lifted their rabbinic restriction or rabbinic prohibition or rabbinic concept that liquids could convey tuma, but halacha l'maisa, of course, Chazal don't have the ability to peel back a doraisa. So we'll say, so this is the fundamental machlokes in Rav and Shmuel. Again, one more time, because this is very important. Rav says midoraisa, no such thing as tumas mashkin. Midrabanon, there is such a thing, but even midrabanon, it just means the liquid has the ability to contract tuma, does not have the ability to transmit tuma. But since it's midrabanon, it doesn't apply in the Beis Hamikdash at all. Shmuel says that halacha l'maisa, midaraisa, mashkin do have the ability to become tamei. Midrabanon, they have the ability to go ahead and transmit tuma. So even in the Beis Hamikdash, the daraisa still stands, but the dirabanon, i.e. the ability to transmit tuma, does not. So let's analyze. Amrlei, Rav Huna bar Chidna lebrei. So Rav Huna bar Chidna said to his son, he said, Ki ailis l'kamei Rav Papa, when you go before Rav Papa, Ramilei, asking the following question, Mi amar Shmuel, docha milatame tumas achem al tumas atzman yesh lahen. Does Shmuel really hold that midaoraisa, mashkin have the ability to go ahead and acquire tuma, and it's only midrabanon that ultimately, again, they transmit? Is that true? Karekan v'abasar asher yiga b'chol tamei lo yochal. Tell him the pasuk that says that the flesh, the meat, that comes in contact with any tummy item shall not be consumed, which Rabbi say sounds like what? If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, Karikan v'abasar sheriga, it's about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, about 14 lines up from the bottom. Karikan v'abasar sheriga, unihid demashkin lo metamul ochlin duchulin, miu gabi kachim sheriga b'chol tameksiv, v'chevon damer mashkin mitamim midarai salasman basar kodesh nogeban, hari naga b'tamei. Ultimately, again, says the Gemara, if you tell me, see, what Rav Huna was saying was as follows. The Pasuk Abosai says, by sacrificial meat, v'habasar asher yiga b'chol tamei. The sacrificial meat that touches anything that is tamei becomes tamei, which I will say sounds very similarly that what? If an item can become tamei, then what? It should convey tuma as well. What was the sheet of Shmuel? The sheet of Shmuel was that liquids can become tamei, but they can't convey tuma. So Rav Huna says to his son, when you go to Rav Papa, just ask him about this pasuk, because the pasuk makes it sound like anything that has tuma can, by definition, what? Convey tuma. So what's the pshat? Amar Rav Shisha Breid Ravidi, first wide line on Tazayin with Aleph. Amar Rav Shisha Breid Ravidi. Midi dahavi aravi'i bakodesh. It could be Abosai that essentially tamei liquid has the status of like a ravi'i bakodesh. Also remember again, the only thing in the world of tuma, normally tuma bottoms out where shlishi, right? And even, really, and we're really even sheni. Shlishi is by truma, but mamish like the rock bottom is ravi'i bakodesh, right? When it comes to sacrificial items, you could have a ravi'i. So ravi'i bakodesh is also called. Puzzle, excellent. Also called puzzle. Sefer Rabbi say, interestingly enough, what the Gemara is suggesting is as follows. Maybe, when Shmuel says that a liquid can become tamei midoraisa, maybe the status of a tamei liquid, Rabbi say, to begin with is like what? Is like a revi'i bakodesh. Which means that halacha l'maisa, the liquid becomes tamei, but what can't it do? It can't transmit. It can't transmit. And that's not per se unique by liquid. It's not the pshat that like a liquid is like a sheni or like a rishon and it can't transmit. Maybe just the status of a liquid that becomes tamei, a liquid begins and ends at a revi'i. Therefore, Allah it can't transmit tuma to anything. So maskeh for Rav Ashi, revi'i bakodesh lo ikri tamei. I'm sorry. Revi'i bakodesh lo ikri, the Gemara lo ikri tamei, high ikri tamei. So we'll say here's the problem. A revi'i bakodesh, already at that point in time, you would not call that item tamei. As we just said before, what would you call that item? You would call that item puzzle. And yet, again, the liquid in question over here is not being referred to as puzzle, but again, it's being referred to ultimately again as tamei. So the kasha is still a good kasha. So let's analyze. So tashma. So again, we're just trying to figure out machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Rav saying midarai said there's no such thing as tumas mashkin. Midrabanan they were gozer, but the Rabbanan were not gozer in the Beis Hamikdash. Shmuel midarai said there is tumas mashkin. Midrabanan ultimately again they were gozer that liquids could convey tuma as well. The conveyance, the rabbinic conveyance, ultimately again does not apply to the Beis Hamikdash. So tashma v'chol mashker sheyishte b'chol kli tamei. So we'll say the pasuk over here says, talking about a kli cheres, right? So it says v'chol mashker asher yishase b'chol kli yitma. Any liquid that you will drink in any tamei utensil, ultimately again will become tamei, which we'll say makes it sound like what? The liquid can become tamei midaraisa. So the Gemara says, "My yitma." What does it mean, yitma? Hichshir. It means ultimately, again, that such liquid, if it comes in contact with something else, will make that secondary item ultimately receptive to tuma. Hichshir. They both say the concept of hechshir tuma, which means that aloch l'maisa item can only become receptive to tuma if it first comes in contact with a liquid. We learned that from the beginning of the pasuk. Mikol ha'ochel sheyeachel. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Chad betlushin v'cham mechubar. So we'll say, here what's happening over here. The Gemara says, the kasha. From this pasuk that says v'chol mashker sheishasa v'chol kli yitma, it sounds like again liquid which comes in contact with a tamei kli can become tamei, which is a proof to Shmuel, a shaila against Rav. To which the Gemara says, no, it doesn't mean the liquid could become tamei, but rather it means a liquid has the ability to go out and be machshir l'kabel tuma, that a liquid has the ability to make another item receptive to tuma. Receptive to tuma, we already learned that at the beginning of the pasuk, to which the Gemara says two different limudim. One is to teach us about liquid that is talush, which means detached from its source, versus bechuber, water that is in its source. And both types of water, both types of liquid, have the ability to be machshir an item l'kabel tuma, to are ready an item to go ahead and become tamei. Both say, why do I need both? Utzrichi, diashmo inon betalushin mishum dachshavinu. Because I might have thought that it's only liquid that's talush, which means we'll say the easiest way to illustrate this is with water, right? So if you have water that's inside of a spring, that's called mechuber. You draw that water away, that's called talush, right? When it's in the spring, it's attached. When it's drawn away, it's detached. I might have thought that only detached liquid has the ability to be machshir an item l'kabel tuma. Why? Because when you detach it and you take it, that's when it's chashuv. Aval mechubar emalov. Maybe if it's in its original source, it's not chashuv. Therefore, it can't be machshir. Vitana mechubar mishum dekam b'duchtayu. Or both if you just taught me that water that's mechubar could be machshir l'kabel tuma because it's in its established place. Therefore, again chashivi. Therefore, it's chashuv. Atlushin emalo. But if it's detached, I might have thought maybe it's not chashuv. Therefore, it's vichi. Therefore, I need both. Therefore, both say the pasuk does not serve as a proof to Shmuel. So Tashma, Ach Mayon Ubar Mikveh Mayim Yetar. So the pasuk says that a Mayon, a wellspring, Bar Mikveh Mayim, or a pit of water, Yiyeh Tahar, will be Tahar, which also makes it sound like what? These waters, these attached waters, right? Waters in the original cannot become Tameh, which also sounds like what? That such waters have the ability to go out and become tamei. Technically speaking, that liquids have the ability to become tamei, like Shmuel, to which the Gemara says, "My yatar." What does it mean? Tar mitum also. But look at Rashi. Rashi says, "Ach mayon abar yatar tashreina holam mechubarninu lo mitamu hatlushim mekabel tuma v'kashi l'rav." So it makes it sound like that it's only because the water is in the spring that it can't become tamei. But if it was detached, it sounds like it could become tamei, which sounds like mashkin can become tamei midaraisa, like like Shmuel, Kashan Rav. To which the Gemara says, "Yatar mitum so fachi kamar im yavo atami b'mayon ubar mikveh mayim yatar." But no, maybe what it means is like this: that if you come into this water, meaning an individual immerses in this water, he can become tahar from his tumah. So actually, what the pasuk is telling me is that a spring or a source of water ultimately could be the source of the source of purification for someone who is already tamei. Okay. So again, so remember just what we have over here. We're just trying machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. The status of mashkin lagabe tuma. Does liquid have the ability to be makabel and transmit tuma? So remember again, Rav says no, right? No. Water liquids do not have the ability to be makabel tuma, and of course, if you can't be makabel tuma, then what? You can't transmit tuma. Rav just says, midrabanan, we say that liquids can acquire tuma, not transmit, but could acquire. And halacha lemaisa, again, that din dirabanan is of course lifted by the Beis Hamikdash. Shmuel says no, liquids acquire midoraisa, transmit dirabanan, and therefore in the Beis Hamikdash they could acquire tuma, but cannot transmit. The dirabanan is lifted. That's the machlokes. Rabbi say, why is the machlokes important to us? Because we're going all the way back now. The Gemara was suggesting that Rabbi Chanina's Kana Kohanim's case, what was his case of tuma? His case of tuma was a piece of sacrificial meat. They came in contact with a liquid that what? That came in contact with the sheretz. And so the whole machlokes, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah, was about the status of that piece of meat, which has to do with tumas mashkin. So hold on, we're going to close the circle in Mirat Hashem at some point. So the Gemara says utlushin mi machshirin. So I'll say now let's take a step back, because the Gemara says something very interesting, that detached liquid has the ability to go ahead and be machshir an item lakabel tuma. Right, detached liquid has the ability to go ahead, and if it comes in contact with another item, has the ability to make it ra'ui lekabel tuma. Is that true? V'ham Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, mashkin beis mitbach, the liquids of the slaughter chamber, lo dayon shein dachon. It's not. We'll say not only are they tahar, ela shein machshirin. We'll say interestingly enough, the liquids of the butchering chamber in the Beis Hamikdash. We'll say not only are they themselves tahar, that they can be lekabel tuma, but if they come in contact with another item, they're not machshir that item lekabel tuma. Both say, remember, just take a step back for just a moment. In order for a solid item to become tameh, it has to be hochshir lekabel tuma. It has to be readied in order to go ahead and absorb tuma. How does an item become readied to go ahead and be makabel tuma? Coming in contact with one of the 7 liquids. Amongst those 7 liquids are water and blood, both which are found in the slaughter chamber. Yet here the Gemara now says, Rabbi Yochanan says that halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says that halacha l'maisa, not only are the liquids of the butcher chamber in the Beis Hamikdash, not only are they not mekabel tuma, but if they come in contact with something else, they don't even make that item hochshir lekabel tuma. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan, tirgama al dam. That's dafka referring to the blood of the butchering chamber. Why? The Gemara is supposed to listen to this. But say, how do you know that sacrificial blood is not machshir, does not allow something else to be makabel tuma? Shenamar ala aretz tishbachenu kamayim. Because it will say, remember again, the reason ultimately again that blood is one of the 7 liquids that makes an item huksha lekabel tuma is because it is compared to water. It is only blood which is comparable to water that is machshir an item lekabel tuma. Dam shenishbach kamayim machshir. Blood that can be spilled out like water is machshir, right? Ultimately, again, makes an item huksha lekabel tuma amud beis. Dam she'il nishbach kamayim eno machshir. Rabbi say blood which cannot be spilled out like water is not machshir lekabel tuma. There, Rabbi say again, what type of blood is not machshir, is not nishbach kamayim? What kind of blood? What kind of blood? Sacrificial blood. Right, but sacrificial blood can't just be poured out on the ground. What do you have to do with sacrificial blood? Right? You have to sprinkle it on the mizbeach. So therefore, we'll say it's very interesting, the technicality. So blood is one of the 7 liquids, which normally, again, is machshir lekabel tuma. If blood comes in contact with a solid item, ultimately, again, it allows the item to be makabel tuma. But what type of blood? Only blood that's like water. Ala ar tishbachenu kamayim, which excludes, of course, sacrificial blood because that cannot be poured out on the ground like water. So the Gemara says, Maskef lo Rav Shmuel bar Ami, hare damat hamsis. I will say, what about damat hamsis? I will say, into the damat hamsis, when you slaughter an animal, I will say, there are 2 things that happen. There's an initial trickle and then a spurting of the lifeblood. And then after the lifeblood spurts out, there's a trickle at the end. That's called damat hamsis. So the Gemara says, I damat hamsis, the nishbach kamayim ve'eno machshir. We'll say, so what about that trickle blood, right? We'll call it the trickle blood. Interestingly enough, that's not machshir. So we'll say that blood, which on one hand is nishbach kamayim, can be poured out, because we'll say, remember again, even by sacrificial animals, the damat hamsis, the blood that you have to do zrika on is the lifeblood, which is the blood that spurts out. But we call the damat hamsis, we'll say that could be poured on the ground like water, and yet halacha l'maisa, yet it's not machshir. Leave aside damat hamsis. I'll tell you why. Because we'll say, interestingly enough, damat hamsis, even by a non-sacrificial animal, is not a type of liquid that is machshir l'kabel tumah. Why not? So the Gemara says, Kabbalah minei Rav Shmuel bar Ami, Kabbalah minei Rav Shmuel bar Ami, Dam Rachmana rak chazak levilti echol hadam. Because we'll say, interestingly enough, the pasuk says, be strong, do not go ahead and eat blood. Why not? Ki hadam hu hanefesh. Because I will say the blood is the lifeline of the animal. Dam shanefesh yotsebo kare dam. Blood that is the life force of the animal, so that's called dam. Dam she'in hanefesh yotsebo eno kare dam. So we'll say, but blood, ultimately again, that is not the lifeblood, right? Blood that ultimately again, literally again, the life of the animal does not depart with it, is not called blood. So we'll say, it's just another interesting blood halacha, right? That interestingly enough, the type of blood that ultimately again is machshir l'kabel tumah, that readies time to receive tumah, is not just any blood, but it dafka has to be lifeblood. So damat hamsis, which is what we'll call the trickle blood, which is the blood before the spurt of lifeblood and the blood that trickles after the spurt of lifeblood. Interestingly enough, even by non-sacrificial animals, that blood ultimately again is not machshir l'kabel tumah. So let's analyze this more. So again, we're still trying to figure out halacha l'maisa in the world of mashka, in the world of liquids, what happens l'gabe tumah? Fundamental machlokis Rav and Shmuel. Rav saying there is no tumah da'oraisa by mashkin. There's only a tumah d'Rabbanan that liquids can go and acquire tumah, but liquids certainly can't convey any kind of tumah. Shmuel says no, mid'oraisa liquids can go ahead and acquire tumah, and midrabbanan they can convey. So let's keep on analyzing. So Tashma, so we'll say now, and furthermore, what else do we have? What we have obviously here, Allah Chalamayim is that even blood, what type of blood can be machshir l'kabel tumah? Only blood that's like water. Ala aretz tishpachenu kamayim. So therefore, we're going to say Allah Chalamayim says sacrificial blood will not go ahead and it will not even be machshir l'kabel tumah, for the reason that it cannot go ahead and be poured on the ground like water. But I will say, but even in sacrificial blood, right? Halacha Chalamayim said dam tamtis, or I should say, even in non-sacrificial blood, not all blood is capable of being machshir not in l'kabel tumah. It's only what? It's only lifeblood. It's only lifeblood. Therefore, dam tamtis, which is trickle blood, even by chulin animals, is not going to be one of the liquids that ultimately is machshir l'kabel tumah, because it's not dam hanefesh. Good. So Tashma, let's say here we go. Tashma, dam shenitma v'zarku b'shogeg hurtza. What's an interesting case? Let's say you have blood. That became tameh. So we'll say, obviously, in general, if you have blood that becomes tameh, you don't offer that up in the Beis Hamikdash. Of course, in this case over here, you made a mistake and you offered it up. So if you did it b'shogeg hurtza. So if you did it b'shogeg, we'll say the avoda works. B'mezid lo hurtza. But if you did it b'mezid, ultimately, again, the carbon is not good. I will say, what do you see from here? That blood can what? Become tameh. Which will say tells us that what? That liquids are capable of acquiring tumah. Like who? Perhaps like who? Like Shmuel. To which the Gemara says, no, maybe not. Midrabanan. I will say, it could very well be that halacha l'maisa, it's only talking about tumah midrabanan. Udilo Karabiosi ben Yoezer ish streda. So we'll say it's quite possible that in fact again the tumah we're talking about over here is only tumah midrabanan, and halacha l'maisa not like Yosi ben Yoezer. Because what did Yosi ben Yoezer say? Yosi ben Yoezer said that halacha l'maisa the liquids of the butchering chamber are tahar. So it could very well be that this reflects another view. It reflects the view A, that ultimately again that the liquids of the butchered chamber can become tahar, but maybe Rabbi say it's not daraisa. Sorry, tamei, but maybe it's not daraisa. Maybe it's only midrabanan. Good. Another example. Tashma amala tzitz miratza. So we'll say the tzitz. Remember again was the plate that the Kohen Gadol wore on his forehead, the plate that said Kodesh LaHashem. So what does the tzitz? What type of atonement does the tzitz affect? Al hadam, al adam, va'al habasar, va'al achilif shenitma. bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, bein ba'onis, bein b'rasin, bein b'yachid, bein b'tzibur. So we'll say, what does the tzitz affect atonement for? So let's leave out, we'll say we're leaving out the whole list. The only thing, I'm right, singular focus. I have tunnel vision right now. The only thing I'm focusing on is all dam all the time. Right? That's all. I have a single track mind, one track mind, dam. We'll say, what do you see from here? What do you see from here? You see that dam can become tameh. So we'll say, so once again, so you have the Braisa saying that the tzitz has the ability to affect atonement for tamei blood which was inadvertently offered up. Whether that blood became tamei d'Rabbanan, b'shogeg, b'mezid, b'tzibor, b'yachid, the tzitz allows for the tamei blood service to be effective. So we'll say, you see explicitly from here that what? That blood can become tamei. So we'll say, this is an issue on two levels. Number one, it contradicts Yosef ben Yoezer, because remember again, what did Yosef ben Yoezer say? What did Yosef ben Yoezer say? That Allah said the liquids of the butchering chamber cannot become tamei. That's Aleph. And Beis, it also contradicts Rav. Because Rav said in general that liquids cannot become tamei midaraisa. And it's only D'Rabbanan. D'Rabbanan doesn't apply in the Beis HaMikdash. So I will say, so it contradicts Yosef ben Yoezer, contradicts Rav. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe not. The Gemara says, mid-D'Rabbanan. Maybe the blood in question is only becoming tamei midrabanan, and maybe again we paskin that blood could become tamei midrabanan even in the Beis HaMikdash. Udilo ki Yosef ben Yoezer, and it's simply, right, and it does not reflect the view of Yosef ben Yoezer ish tzreida. Good, Tashma, v'nasa Aaron es avan hakadoshim. The pasuk says that Aaron will literally carry upon himself the iniquity of the sacrificial items. So the Gemara says another way of saying that certain of the big day kahuna have the ability to go ahead and effect atonement if something tamei was offered. V'chi'eza avon hu noseh. Shabbos say, what avon, what avera is the tzitz meratzeh for? So the Gemara says, im avon pigul, hari ukvar ne'amar lo yiratzeh. So we'll say, it can't be pigul, because we'll say once a carbon is pigul, there's no return. You can't fix that. Im avon nosar, if it's nosar, hari kvar ne'amar lo yichashev. Says again, it won't work. We'll say, ha'ino noseh ela avon tuma shehutra michlala b'tzibur. We'll say the only thing that the tzitz has the ability to affect atonement for is tuma. It's tuma. Because we'll say, remember again, there is a case ultimately again of tuma, which I will say we see, for example, tuma b'tzibur. If 51% of Klal Yisrael is tamei, tuma hutra b'tzibur. So it must be that the tzitz allows for the following. If halacha l'maisa, something was offered up in a state of tuma, the tzitz is able to fix that. My lav tumas dam. Both says I'm not talking about the tuma of dam, and you see from here that dam, that liquid, can become tamei. Amar Papa, no, lo tumas kamatzim. Both say what it means is the kmitza. If halacha l'maisa, again, remember kmitza is by the karban mincha. Remember again, we learned this. Kohen takes his 3 middle fingers. He lifts up from the flour of the mincha, shaves it off with his thumb and with his pinky, offers it up on the mizbeach. That's the section of the mincha that's offered up. What it means is, if the kamitza became tamei, then halacha l'maisa, the tzitz is meratza, the tzitz is able to affect atonement for the kamitza. But it says absolutely nothing about the status of blood. So we'll say we'll stop over here for today, but just understand what we're ending with. So we'll say we got onto a major detour, very, very exciting and riveting detour, but a detour nevertheless. So we'll say again, this is all part. Remember, our goal over here is that Ebirat Hashem, come the first day of Hanukkah, come Friday, we are going to be experts in the halachas of Tumantara. So we just waded into a very serious sugya about the status of liquids. We got started with that because, again, the Gemara was suggesting that this was the Isha Rabbi Chanina's Kana Kohanim. That maybe the tummy sacrificial meat that he's referring to was a piece of meat that came in contact with liquid, which came in contact with the sheretz. And then the status was, what's the tumah of that meat? Which then opened the door to the entire discussion regarding tumas mashkin. So we'll say, just hold on to the following piece of information. Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. That's the ikar. If you take one thing, that is the ikar. The ikar, as Rav says, mid'oraisa, no such thing as tumas mashkin. Doesn't exist. Midrabanan exists, it exists, but the Drabanan does not apply inside of the Beis HaMikdash. Shmuel says no. Mid'oraisa, there is tumas mashkin. We'll say, what type of tumas mashkin according to Shmuel? According to Shmuel, what type of tumas mashkin? Mid'oraisa, what? Liquids can acquire tumah, but they cannot transmit tumah. Midrabanan, they can transmit tumah, and that Drabanan ultimately, again, does not apply inside of the Beis HaMikdash. But Rabbi say furthermore, what else do we say? What else do we see? We have Yossi ben Yoezra who says all of the liquids of the butchering chamber do not go ahead and acquire or convey any kind of tumah. When it comes to blood, right? So Rabbi say blood has the ability to act as one of the 7 mashkin, to make something ready, the kabel tumah, as long as what? As long as it's blood that's like water. Which teaches us 2 things. Number 1, it doesn't apply to sacrificial blood. Therefore, sacrificial blood cannot go and be mashkin in the kabel tumah. And number 2, Rabbi say what type of blood does it apply to? Only what type of blood? What type of blood? Ultimately, again, lifeblood, right? Only lifeblood. But damatamtsis, which is the trickle blood, halacha l'maisa, is not machshir an item even by chulin, lekabel tumah. We'll pick up here tomorrow. Shkayach, say.